All right, here we are. Hello, everyone. It's that time again for another Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. I am so excited. We are joined by Mr. Joe Toliver. Hey, hey,
How
hey.
you doing? Hello, everyone. How's
Good,
everything going? I
good.
think you good, great.
All right. So, you know how this works. Go ahead and invite your friends to the Facebook group so they can tune in as we talk about how to create brand awareness for your nonprofit organization. If you're catching this on replay, give us a hashtag replay in the chat box. And we would love to know if you are here. Give us a hey, how you doing in the chat box. Hi, Kendrick. Thank you for tuning in. How you been? Thank you for tuning in today. And we are going to go ahead and get started. But before we get started, I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsor. We have the award-winning writer, actor, cartoonist, motivational speaker, and public relations expert, Jalen Christie, who's our sponsors for this month's series that we've been presenting on marketing and public relations for nonprofit organizations. So thank you, Jalen, for being our sponsor. Please make sure that you tune in next week. He will be joining us and talking about public relations and telling your nonprofit story. So you definitely do not want to miss that. So make sure that you tune in next week. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So creating brand awareness for your
Gotta do it.
nonprofit.
You have to
Yes.
do it. Gotta do it. It's very important.
So let's talk. You hear marketing, you hear what's brand awareness? What does that mean?
Well, brand awareness, especially for a nonprofit, is the distinction between the product, right? And then who you are known as in the marketplace, right? Mm-hmm. So it's one thing you have a product, but it's another thing to have an awareness of who you are or what your product is about in the marketplace. And that's where so many nonprofits fail at. They are the best kept secrets often in their communities. And it's because they have not come up with a strategy to expand their brand so folks will know the good work that they're doing.
Yeah, because so often we hear about the marketing, we hear about, the public relations, but not putting together that brand awareness and what people think about when they hear your nonprofit's name.
But think about it, Lasheena. Look at companies like FedEx. When you think about FedEx, you immediately think overnight delivery, right? Apple, you think cutting edge. When is the next update coming out, or when is the new phone coming out? You immediately think these things because your brand is supposed to make you feel a certain way, or make your consumer or your client feel a certain way. So one of the things, that's why, companies relate to, that about delivering when it comes to FedEx, or about the importance of technology and how it works. I mean, we have savvy consumers now, and we also have savvy funders as well. And so our nonprofits really have to be on point and intentional about putting their brand out, making sure folks not only know their brand, but really make sure your brand connect well with your mission. So that way, they get a full compass of who you are. And sometimes you can often do that in a few words, at least in my opinion, especially when it comes to your mission, less than 25. That's always my golden rule, right?
Yes.
Your mission must be less than 25, but your mission plays a very important role in developing your brand, your mission and your vision.
Love it, love it. So, why is it important to create brand awareness for organizations?
Well, Lasheena, if you're looking to be funded, and you're looking for funders, oftentimes the funders need to understand the work that you're doing. But if you're not out there telling your story, right? And I always say that your story should be told in two frameworks. It should be anecdotal, right? The real stories from the real people, but it also should be supported by the data. And that really helps in terms of telling funders what you're doing and how successful you're doing. It's like a resume. You can list all the different things that you've done on the resume, but that really doesn't help a potential employer, right? But if you list everything on your resume and talked about how good you did, or how well you were at it, or how much of it you did, that puts a different look on it. It makes a potential employer look at you through a different lens, right? It's the same thing with brand awareness, right? For nonprofits. When you are out there talking about the importance of your work and the impact that you've created, it's a different look for you now. Your funder sees you differently. They want to work with you because they're hearing about your work. But you could be doing all this work in isolation and, undercover. It's really hard for funders. They're not going to dig and look, right? They're not going to look for the resume that's qualitative and quantitative, right? They're not going to look for the pink one, right? Or the one that's sprayed with perfume. They're going to look for the one that really stands out above the crowd, that tells a story about the work that person can do and the work nonprofits do in the community. You must not be your community's best kept secret because funding is at risk, right? People inability to know the services that you do is at risk. Therefore, you cannot spend down maybe grant dollars that you've received, right? So your brand is very important. And I always tell folks that when you look at your overall budget for your nonprofit, a part of what you should be looking at is an itemized line for branding and marketing, because it is absolutely essential to your success.
Love it.
I know I'm kind of strong on this, right?
But it's so important.
I tell you why. A few years ago, maybe a decade and a half ago, I got an opportunity to serve as a grants administrator. But I just wasn't a grant administrator. I had $1.9 million federal block dollars going down to local governments, grassroots nonprofits, police departments to provide prevention, intervention, and treatment for substance abuse prevention intervention programs. And a part of what we did was not only funding the money, but we knew the money was limited, right? And we wanted these programs to be sustained beyond the funding that we were going to give them. And so part of what we did was work with those individual organizations. As a matter of fact, there was 33 of them. But we worked with them individually, not only ensuring that they were successful with their requirements that were for the grant, but also that they were successful in terms of sustainability. How would they continue to do the work after those funds that we were providing were gone? And so we really worked on developing plans for that. And a part of where most of these organizations failed, and I mean, these could be anywhere in terms of scale, from a small nonprofit that has a budget of less than $50,000 to a huge municipality with multi-million-dollar budgets. But they all had something in common. And that was their inability to understand the importance of brand awareness when it comes to their programs and their services. And many of them didn't fail or was not successful because they couldn't meet the requirements of the grants. But many of them didn't do very well at taking it to the next level in terms of sustainability because nobody knew about the work that they were doing or how good it was. And they didn't invest in putting together the story, right, about the work that they do. And so many of those organizations, when I look back today, some of them are around and some of them are not. And it's partly because, hey, listen, they have the passion. We all have the passion, right? They got the passion, they love the work. You don't get into this business because you think you're gonna get paid. You get in this business because you know that you have been blessed to be able to create impact in somebody's life. And a lot of times these folks got in with passion, but I will encourage folks to equate your passion with structure. And that's why it's so important to have a brand awareness strategy for your organization.
I love that. And I love the example that you gave. And then I just started thinking about, like, this morning, I was sitting on a grant review panel where we review the proposals and we're discussing it today amongst, the amongst the other reviewers. And this was I believe it was like a $2.5 million grant that's being given out. And we were talking, and some of the organizations I did not hear of. And so solely I had to rely on the proposal. Mm-hmm. But there were some organizations that you knew of. And it goes back to that brand. Like I didn't have to have an interaction with them, but I knew what they did. I knew how they did it. So even when I'm reviewing the proposal, if they did miss something, I'm filling in the blanks.
Even if it wasn't great. Even if it wasn't great, you already know, hey, yeah, I get that. But take one step deeper. What about when you get a grant application and it talks about recruitment to their program services? Or if it doesn't talk about it? That's a very scary proposition, because if they're saying that, hey, it's a new organization, imagine new organization, first time they grant application, and then they say they're going to serve 150 young people, but they have no recruitment plan. That's a part of your brand awareness, that recruitment plan, because you would want to know those participants know about your program. Even if you can pull them all from one place, they still need to know who you are.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of like, taking it one little step even deeper in terms of grant review. If I'm reviewing your grant application and I don't see a recruitment plan, red flag goes up.
Yep.
Because now I'm questioning how you're going to get those 150.
Right.
So it's so many pieces of the puzzle that your brand awareness plays a part in, that we just have to be caught. That's why we're here today. That's why Nonprofit Enthusiast is around. That's exactly why we're here, is to share good information so you can avoid some of the obstacles that Lasheena and I have seen over the course of the years, right? Mm-hmm. And one of them is you must create brand awareness for your programs and your services. There's no getting around it.
Yep. Well, I love that.
I hope that folks are resonating. If folks are getting that, if they're feeling that, please give me a thumbs up and let me know that, that it's that what I'm saying is something that you can really apply to the work that you're doing.
Yep.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, we got some hearts coming up.
Hey.
Yeah, I love it.
So
hi, Shante.
I would say, what are some important things in creating your brand awareness for your organization? Listen, the first thing you got to have, you can't do anything if you don't have a mission, vision, and core values. That is a must. You cannot even start your brand awareness without that. So I'm assuming that everybody on this call has a mission, vision, and core values that they can say by heart. They know it by heart. It's so ingrained in them that they're able to say it by heart, because that's tough. Because a lot of times we come up with a mission and vision and they don't represent who we are. So it's always good to make sure, if you do have a mission and vision and core values, that you go back and look at it, reassess it. I always say, at any point you have an opportunity to pivot, right? But if you're going to pivot, let me give you a couple of tidbits on how to do that, especially when it comes to your program. I don't often use, I should say, acronyms. Lasheena loves them, but
I do.
I don't often use them, but I'm going to give you one today. And that's, sometimes in your organization, you need to get on a rope. ROPE. You need to reassess, organize, plan, and then execute. Sometimes our passion over the course of time needs some realignment, needs some reconnecting, or it may not fit with an appropriate structure. So sometimes we may have to pivot. And a part of pivoting is grabbing onto this thing I like to call rope, to reassess, what you're doing. Is it still your passion? Do you still think it has value? Do you believe that the work you're doing can create an outcome that's desirable, right? That's reassessing. And if you reassess and say, hey, listen, what I came up with needs a little tweaking, but this is still good. This is still who I am. This is still what we need and what our community needs. Then it's time to organize. It's time to get folks who think or believe similar to you and bring them on board as board members, as task force members, but allow them to help you develop programming and services. I like to say a logic model, but that's another conversation, that you all can buy into, that you all can not only buy into, but celebrate and promote and brand, right? So that's a part of the organization. And then plan. And that's your logic model, is planning it piece by piece. What works? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? What are contributing factors to that problem? What are strategies to solving the problem? And then what are specific activities that you can do? And if you can come up with all of that, then you can start talking about, well, if I do all of that, what are outcomes that I suggest? And when you get to those activities, I'll just take one step back. Those activities is where your brand awareness comes into play. Because all those activities you come up must be promoted. It's a part of your brand. It's a part of your story and the work that you're doing in the community. And the people whose lives you're changing is the story. Then you just back it up with the data, which is easy to do when you have an evaluation plan. But again, that's another conversation. That's for another day, right, Lasheena? So I will encourage you to make sure that your mission, vision, and core are on point. If not, reassess, organize, plan, and execute again. Come up with your strategic plan, your logic model. And I also suggest that all your messages, right? When you send out messages, whether it is a newsletter or as a press release, be reminded that your message should be constant and consistent. And that whatever you send out is the voice of your organization. So always be careful that you're managing what your messaging should look like, right? And then the only other thing that I would say is important in terms of your brand awareness is make sure you create for your organization, your complete organization, guidelines, rules about the font, about the logo, about what type of colors that we're going to use, what the palette would look like. That's the visual identity that's very important in terms of folks having a emotional connection to your brand, right? So and I'll go back to this. This is why I don't like to use acronyms, because acronyms, it's harder for a person to have an emotional attachment to an acronym. But to a name or to a full name or to a full thing, people can attach to it. So you think a lot of times we see branding failures, they don't work. Like, I'll give you an example, Burger King, right? We know Burger King. And for a while, they were trying to do BK. And it's still kind of around every once in a while, but it still doesn't have the brand awareness that Burger King has. McDonald's, for a while, they were doing Mickey D's, or was that us coming up with that? I don't know. I don't remember. Yeah, exactly. But it still held on to the brand of McDonald's, the Golden Arches, right? That's a very old brand awareness that stayed around for a very long time. So it's important to make sure that your logo looks the same, that your font looks the same, and use as less acronyms as possible.
So I'm gonna add on to this, because we have had tons of conversation around this acronym internally with the team. We've all had it, but you bring up a really good point. Yes, when you use an acronym, there is no feeling towards it. So if we went behind the name, I'll use us as an example. If we said NPE and you all heard NPE, what does that mean to you? You know what I mean? And then other people start to repeat it and say it, and that becomes, and I even think about our organization, it's Love Our Youth. It is acronyms. And then I realized our brand is built on Love Our Youth. That's what our brand is built on. We've never really publicized what love stands for. So we made that acronym, but never really publicized what it means. Our brand is our acronym.
Yes.
So I really do encourage, and we've had several conversations, and I'm on that team now, Joe, of don't use acronyms. If you use it, it's for internal, your own memory, just for you, but not for the public to see. Because, and I remember us having a conversation, you talking about it being a distraction, brand distraction is what it presents. So no one knows who you are. Are you, and I'll use us as an example, are we NPE or are we nonprofit enthusiasts? No one really knows and I'm just using that so others can understand. No one really knows who you are, nor do they identify or feel anything about who you are. And it happens so much in the nonprofit industry. And I would say even coming from like the government, we use acronyms for everything. And then I find myself in rooms repeating acronyms, and everyone doesn't understand the acronym that you just it's just so
and they
ingrained.
don't want to stop you and ask you.
Right.
So they'll just let you keep saying it, and later on they'll maybe make a note. What is NPE? You know,
right.
But then they've lost the context of the conversation because they're thinking about that. When you say NPE, I feel nothing. But when you say nonprofit enthusiast, I feel a certain kind of way. Like, right? Don't people feel that? You know, feel that when you? That's what I think. You know, I just feel a certain kind of way, and that's what brand awareness is all about. How people perceive you, right? And that people do see you, right? And so, which is why I wanted to have this conversation today and really talk through like the importance of brand awareness, how it should represent anywhere from 8 to 12% of your budget, especially for organizations of $50,000 or less. If you're $50,000 or more, it should be upwards of 19% of your budget. It really makes sense because, especially with the way that we communicate in society today, most of our transactions are happening in terms of awareness and brand awareness. It's happening on social media, but it is not the only place that it can happen. That's why your brand awareness must be consistent across all your platforms, whether it's social media, whether it's your marketing collateral, same messaging, same look and feel, same color. All of that is important. Lasheena and I work with groups all the time. We just finished working with a group that just did a fundraiser, and it went great and awesome. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we worked with them was what their brand would look like and how they would communicate that at this event. And they had different pieces of the puzzle. Oftentimes, they would send us stuff that was off brand, and we would say, "Nope, can't use it. You got to stay on brand." I mean, it really is important because it is said that a person will if after seeing something 7 or more times, it's almost ingrained in their brain. So if I send it to you 7 different ways, then how will I ever be ingrained in your brain? But if I send you messaging that's consistent 7 times, you're going to remember it. It's going to be ingrained in you. So that's what I wanted to share, right, Lasheena, about brand awareness. Are there any questions you might have for me?
Let me go into the chat box. We have some conversation happening. Right. Hey, Shantae, how are you? We have Shantae said, oh, this was earlier in the conversation. Every time I step in the room, let me go down. And you gave the tips about rope, reassess, organize, plan, and execute. Reminded everyone that messages should be constant and consistent in the voice of your organization and having brand guidelines. And then we have Zelper who joined us. Hey, Zelper, thank you for joining us. And then Shantae said this was spot on.
All right.
I have been refocusing on my brand all week. So this is perfect.
That's perfect. Good. Great. Man, congratulations, guys. Thank you for listening. Lasheena, I know you got questions for me.
I think you touched on it. What about so how do you design your organization's like visual identity? What does that look like?
Well, I can tell you how I've done in the past.
Okay.
So I was a consulting at one point for a federally qualified health center. They had 5 locations, including a dental office. And so as they were building an additional office and an additional dental office, we started to we were looking at their brand, their logos, some of their marketing collateral, and we were revamping it. One of the toughest things to do was to kind of figure out which colors to use, right? What colors work? So since this was a federally qualified health center, we know that this is health, right? So one of the things that I offered my clients was I did a color study where I actually did, it was like 4 pages. It was really in depth, which talked about what colors and what those colors reflected, right? What they meant for people when they experienced those colors. And that was how we determined which colors. And I'll go ahead and tell you what happened. The brand study found that shades of green and blue is consistent with feeling safe and feeling healthy and feeling encouraged, right? Things of that nature. So those colors really stood out. in terms of if you're going to do something that's health related. But if you notice, if you go into most doctor's office, you notice the colors are blue and green, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at logos, blue and green.
Mm-hmm.
So the color study really helped the organization that I was working with, which had a board of like 20 people, really break it all the way down to colors, not based on individual preferences, but in terms of the industry that they're in.
Wow.
So that's how we do colors.
That's a good point, because I'm sure, especially some founders can say that when starting and deciding on the colors of your organization or what the logo should look like, I don't think the feeling of the color was part of it.
No, I think you had your color in your mind and you just
yes.
Trust me, they're all her colors.
How does it make me feel? But you're right. You got to think about, especially with branding, how what does it tell others?
Exactly. Yeah, it speaks. It's a part of that whole thing of, sharing almost like an intimate part of yourself, right? Or an intimate part of your organization. Allowing folks to get up close to you, and so those colors make a real difference. Logo design too is very important, right? And I would encourage folks, the simpler, the better. We are in an age of logos not being something that you have to get an artist to draw. I'm not coming down on art, but it's just not that technical. If you look at the marketplace in terms of logos, I see simple logos out there. Simple logos, simple colors. And the one thing I will share, like sometimes your logo, maybe I will give you a few, you can use your colors. So for example, let me clear this up. For example, Nonprofit Enthusiast, right? You can use that same design, but use different colors as long as they're part of your color palette. Okay, so if you're in design, right, and a part of your color palette is green, blue, and orange, but your original logo is black and pink, you're able to use the orange and the green and the blue because it's a part of your color palette. If it's designed, if it's a part of design, if it makes the design looks better, right? But that's the only distinction I can get around my head around. Okay.
Love it, love it, love it. Yes.
Anything else is like you're breaking the rule.
Right. Yeah.
And you want your logo on everything. Don't send anything out without your logo.
And with you saying that also, having some sort of brand guide or having that guide is helpful. And I've seen it a lot where also, let's say funders want to use your logo or other partners want to use your logo. You can also share your parameters for using your logo with them. Like, don't make it this, the sizing, the colors, don't alter our colors and things like that.
Yes, you can send them your brand content. A lot of times they'll ask for it. A lot of times they'll ask for it.
Yep.
And you want to do that. And I remember I at one point, a part of my career is working for nationally affiliated nonprofit organization, right? And we're one arm of maybe 1,400 other affiliates. And so now you're talking about branding on a different scale, because now your brand has to be consistent with a national brand. Well, sometimes that don't always fit design. So it's so many different things about this, right? So many pieces of puzzle. But I encourage new nonprofits, right? For example, we just worked with the Sickle Cell Group, right? World Sickle Cell Day was June 19th. They have a certain brand and certain look. The question would be, do you, because you work with Sickle Cell, shift your brand and look to look like World Sickle Cell Day? Sometimes you do. And the reason that you might want to consider that is because they have a bigger brand awareness than you. You could tag on like a tugboat. So yes, I would encourage that. That's a question. If you want to be connected to a nationally affiliate organization and their colors are red and white, yeah, why not make your colors red and white and connect on to their brand? Absolutely, yes.
Love it. All right. So we have a question in the chat box from Zelfer. Do you have any tips on how to clarify your marketing message?
Your marketing message should always connect with and represent your mission. It always should be everything always goes back to your mission and vision. And sometimes your core values.
Love it. Yep. And that's across your organization. Like
Yes.
when you're doing things, that's a good way to test it, is testing it against your mission, your programs. I'm developing a new program. Does this align with my mission?
Yes.
I'm marketing.
Well, hopefully they'll have a logic model.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
How many folks on the call today have a logic model already complete?
Yes.
I want to know.
Right. Let us know if you have a logic model. And if you don't, you really should have one in place. And if you need help, just give us a call. We're here to help you develop that. But I love when we go through the logic model process because it helps clarify some of these branding areas, right?
It might make you mad too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it's so interesting because just like how we're saying everything needs to tie back up to the mission, it happens through that logic model process as well. Does this align with the mission that we have set forth? It's like it's testing it's testing the mission. Well, not the mission.
And let me just say this, interject. We're assuming that folk know what a logic model is, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So a logic model is basically a theory of change. What work you propose to do to make a change, right? Or impact in your community. That's what a logic model does. It predetermines it for you. So in other words, a logic model actually develops your program services. And it gives you the latitude to actually evaluate whether or not they're effective or not. So that's what a logic model is, just to make sure folks.
Right. No, I agree. And if you don't have one, definitely, no matter what, you could be a 10-year-old nonprofit, a 20-year-old nonprofit. If you don't have one, I encourage you to go ahead and get that process in place. Do a logic model for your organization, or we'll make it easy for you. Just give us a call and we got you covered. www.nonprofitenthusiast.com. We got you. Because it's such an amazing process. And I love when we're going through it with boards and just seeing the different input and kind of, it forces you to think beyond, the surface or what you see. So yes, definitely do that.
I laugh because, one group that we were working with recently, when they were looking at their problems, they were looking at problems in their community. They almost felt as if it was like an indictment to their community because this was really, I believe, the first time that they looked at their community with those lenses, with those pair of lenses on. So when you do a logic model, it really does resonate when you say, hey, listen, this is really the problem that I'm trying to fix. And you instantly are acknowledge the enormity of it, right? And the power that you have. And so it's a great process. And a part of what your brand awareness is much easier facilitated when you have a completed logic model, because everything is there all on one page.
Yes.
It's a beautiful thing. And it's a living document, right? And you're able to go in and say, okay, activity may be, I'm going to run a 8-week summer program that focuses on males and reading only. And you might zero in. So how are you going to market for that, right? How are you going to make your brand, make folks who parent young men that age aware that you have this program going on? That's all brand awareness is. It's that simple. So that's it for me, Lasheena. I hope that helps.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hopping back on with us this month to talk about brand awareness. We have one more session in the area of marketing and public relations, and that's next week. Our sponsor, Jalen Christie, will be hopping on to talk about public relations. So make sure that you tune in next week. And we look forward to seeing you all then. And don't forget to invite your friends over to the group so that they can tune in to these live sessions. So other than that, we will see you all next week. Bye, everyone.
Have a great one.